Let's see how we're checking drugs on a sugar example.
I'm at the office of Mandala. It's one of the few harm reduction clinics in Georgia where drug users can kick their addictions, seek mental health treatment, or test the drugs that they're using to ensure that they're safe. Salome, the clinic's psychologist, is showing me exactly how she conducts those tests. Harm reduction clinics have been around for decades, with most of them being standard in European cities. Progressive activists like Salome and even some political parties want to take the shame out of drug use here in Georgia. Drug overdoses have skyrocketed over the years, and harm reduction activists say the country's harsh drug laws aren't stopping drug use as they were intended. In fact, it just sends even more people to the black market where bad drugs are rampant and unregulated. That's where Mandala comes in. I assume that there are not many organizations like yours that help people find clean needles and test their drugs to make sure that they're safe. This must be a very controversial topic here in Georgia, right?
It's not easy to make this job actually, because everyone, the general population in Georgia, of course, doesn't like people who use drugs and doesn't like people who help them. But we believe that we are making really necessary thing. It's really important for our community.
America, my country, we definitely are not very progressive when it comes to harm reduction. I can only imagine what it's like for you to explain what harm reduction means in Georgia.
Yeah, we always looking at the best practices, mostly from Europe, and we are trying to do same things what they are doing. When we are working at nightclubs and at festivals, we are there during the night, and we are getting there our materials, everything, all stuffs, and we are helping them to test substances, and we are taking care of them when someone has an overdose.
How many bad drugs do you catch coming through here every day?
Oh, it's a difficult question. The drug market is so contaminated in Georgia, and for now it's a breakout of alpha PVP, if you know this drug. It's really dangerous. Really bad substance in our field. We had a fentanyl breakout last year, and many people, I can say that many people died because of fentanyl. And this kind of breakout is ended, but there is several cases when it's still in a Georgian market. Fentanyl, but the bigger problem for Georgian drug market is now alpha PVP. Yeah, it's very common, and in most cases people does not know if they are getting alpha PVP. Actually, they think that they have some MDMA, maybe ecstasy or other drugs, but actually in this substance consists alpha PVP.
Can you explain what this drug is exactly?
It's kind of amphetamine.
You said that you're the only organization where you test the quality of the drug, right? So I'm curious, how come there are not more centers like yours around Tbilisi or even the country? Because obviously you're legally here.
It's a complicated subject, actually, because I can say that this thing, what we are doing when we are checking the drugs, it's legal. I can't say it because it's not legal, actually. When someone bring a drug and give me to test it, it's not legal. Yeah.
Okay, but the authorities obviously know that you are here.
Yeah.
And you actually have to have some type of license to...
We have not any license.
Oh.
Yeah. It's just just happening. They know that we are making very important thing. Just that's it. Yeah, we never talk about this with them.
But they know.
Yeah, of course they know.
The Georgian government's response to rising drug overdoses has been harsh. People who are caught with even the smallest amount of drugs can face up to 20 years in prison. Back in 2016, for example, Kote Japaridze and two of his friends were arrested on possession of 2 grams of MDMA, a recreational synthetic drug. They were charged with possession of a particularly large quantity of drugs, punishable by 8 to 20 years in prison. They were reportedly pressured into a plea deal and ended up being sentenced to 6.5 years. Japaridze was released after 6 months on a presidential pardon. But the punishment didn't end there. He was stripped of his driver's license, barred from certain jobs for 5 years, and hit with a $10,000 fine, for which he had to take out a loan to pay off.
We did not register, just like we don't assign this Russian law, so we have to pay huge fine because of this. We have not any kind of this material. We have not money for this, and we have to close this organization if the government doesn't change.
She's talking about a very controversial piece of legislation that was signed into law this spring that forces any organization that receives more than 20% of their funding from the West to open their books to the government. Most civil society organizations receive up to 90% of their funding from the West. Civil society organizations have been very critical in revolutionary actions in Georgia, and critics of the law say that that's the reason Georgia Dream pushed a bill through Parliament. If organizations refuse to register, they face fines that tally into the thousands of dollars. So for your organization, it's very important that for this upcoming election.
Yeah, it's existentially important for us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if the government doesn't change?
We have to close this organization because work in this situation when this government is again here, I can't imagine how to work.
The ruling Georgia Dream government won the recent parliamentary elections, but the opposition and many international observers claim the process was rigged. However, a new wave of protests against the government that have gone on for more than a week show no signs of slowing down. But for now, the Georgian people are left with what's largely viewed as a pro-Russian government. And organizations like Mandala are left with a Russian-style law that puts their work in jeopardy. We're back to Mandala's offices to check out the mood of how people are feeling, because obviously the election results aren't what the staff had hoped for. And now I just want to go in and see how people are feeling. Nada Aspenadze, who handles Mandala's social media and other tasks, first became acquainted with the organization to find support for herself.
Well, I initially started working just as a volunteer because I loved what the organization was doing. I knew about them for a couple of years, and then I came here as a customer just to go through consultation. And the environment that I saw and the people that I met were just incredible. And I think a week later, I was like, can I just work here? Not even work, I just wanted to help them for free.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you came here as a customer. Do you feel comfortable talking about as a customer? So are you a recreational user yourself?
I was a recreational user for a while. And as a lot of people in Georgia, I as well was using recreationally because I had a lot of pain, psychological pain, which in my case came from my personal experiences, but for a lot of people that we work with, it comes from the poor state of our country, either directly or indirectly. Because when the economical state of the country is so horrible, when young people do not see how their life could get better and how their dreams could be achieved, it is very difficult for them to just be content with their life and be sober 24/7. that makes our work a little easier because we are a peer-to-peer organization, so we know what we're talking about. We have been there most of the time. So when someone comes to me and says, oh, like I have this thing with, for example, MDMA, that it just makes me feel so much better, it makes me feel alive, it makes me full of love. I'm like, I know, but it always has a price. It always has consequences, especially MDMA, which is the most popular drug in Georgia right now. It is very, very difficult for you to recover your brain from using MDMA systematically because the way it affects your neurons is so consistent and so long. It has a very long-lasting effect, basically. So if someone, for example, there was a period when I was taking it, for example, weekly, or maybe sometimes a couple of times a week. And back then it was fine, but then I realized what a heavy price I had to pay for that.
What's that heavy price?
The heavy price is that, for example, a lot of people who have, let's say, depression, any type of depression, would use sometimes those stimulants to kind of lie to their brains that they're feeling fine. But the reality is that after you come down from that substance, it makes those symptoms much, much worse.
The current political situation in Georgia isn't making life any easier for young people. The Georgia Dream government just announced that they are no longer pursuing European Union membership, which sparked the current protests across the country. Hundreds of thousands of Georgians are immigrating each year, a significant number for a country of roughly 4.5 million people. Inability to find work is a driving factor, but an overarching issue is the government's push to move the country towards Moscow and further away from Europe, which most of the country is against. I hear about so many young people who are just immigrating. Yep. And so as opposed to just being here and dealing with the system, they think, okay, I'm young, I can speak English or I can learn another language, I could just go to Europe.
That's a very familiar topic for everyone in our generation, I believe, because this situation has been going on for 12 years, right? So that was before I finished high school. And a lot of smart, bright, talented people that I knew are no longer in Georgia, and they're not planning to come back, unfortunately, because not only is the political situation bad, the fields that they wanted to work in are severely underdeveloped in Georgia, and it's not going to get any better, most probably, because those fields are only getting better because of foreign aid. And now if foreign aid stops, I don't believe that the economical situation or any working situation is going to get better.
You're somebody who is educated and you have talents and you could go abroad just like anyone else. So why don't you have that mentality of just saying, I'm just going to run because there's nothing here for me?
Sometimes we are thinking about that maybe, but...
It's always on the back of our mind.
Yeah. Me as Nada, I never wanted to live in another country because I love this country. This is my place. My relatives are there, my friends are there. So if everyone will go abroad, who will stay there? Who? Just Georgian dreams? No way. The people who is voting Georgian dreams are so poor. They have no money. No, and maybe 15 jail is enough to get them swapped. Yeah, and that's why Georgian Dream need that all kind of people like us leave the country. Yeah, they are trying that.
So what about the people who need this organization? You can continue to volunteer, but you obviously need the infrastructure. Having this type of infrastructure empowers you to help more people. What's your fear about the people who come to Mandala for services and it's no longer here?
Yeah, there is a big danger that we lose this place and we would not have money to get some new office, but our community is supporting to us so much, yeah. We have the very good connection to them, and we hope that they will help us when we need.
A lot of these people come here for their drugs to be tested, and when these organizations don't exist, they're not going to have friendly environments to do it.
We can go to them everywhere. Yeah, we are working as outreach workers as well. We know how to do that.
When Mandala staff aren't supporting clients in the office, they're in the techno clubs, educating partygoers about safe drug use as well as safe sex. Clubs are where many of the drug overdose cases are taking place, making them critical places to meet clients where they are. But unfortunately, it's also where law enforcement cracks down on drug users, often harshly. That's what makes Mandala's work so critical. Clients know the staff won't judge them, and when they provide their private information to Mandala, they feel confident that it's protected. This foreign agent law does the opposite.
The goal that this law has to create this transparency of our funding, the transparency of our funding already exists. The transparency of every organization's funding already exists. We ourselves, every funding that we receive goes through the government of welfare, the Ministry of Welfare. So every penny that we receive, not only does it go through the government, we write monthly reports of every type of expense that we have back to the donor, back to the ministry. And every organization is by law expected to do that. If you don't do that, you're just going to get fined, independent from this law. So the only thing that this law changes has nothing to do, by the way, with, again, transparency. The only thing that it changes is that after you register as an agent, if the government decides, on no basis, by the way, whatsoever, if they just decide that they want to investigate you, that they want to close you, they will have the power to do that. They will be able to retrieve every bit of information that you have, whether confidential or not, and then use it however they wish. That is what's written in the law. And that's what people don't want, because there are a lot of sensitive details, not only in our database that we cannot share with almost anyone, but also in a lot of our other organizations' data. For example, when you go to an LGBTQI rights organization, right? They have a lot of sensitive data about their beneficiaries, their testing results, their addresses, their phone numbers. And in a country like Georgia, for that to become available to anyone who can abuse that is horrible. And people will just stop using the organization whatsoever. And it's necessary for their life. If you don't get tested, you may die. If you don't get treated, you may die. If you don't get treated with us, if you don't receive the necessary information or testing with us, you can die. Every person that has ever expressed their negative opinion of the government or any government official will be under risk. Because we have already seen that during protests during this year and during the last year, people were getting calls, people were getting ambushed, people were getting their homes broken into, their pets being beat up, their mothers being beat up, just by this random person or a random group that eventually, of course, no one was able to pinpoint to anything.
Pro-democracy activists have told me that Georgia Dream wants to purge the country of people who dare to resist their undemocratic practices. The fewer civil society groups critical of the government, the better it is for the ruling party to control the rest of the population with disinformation, bribes, and scare tactics. Eka Gigauri, the executive director of Transparency International Georgia, said Georgia Dream's aims are clear.
We know what they want from Georgia, and we know how they act. And we know that sometimes they also are very smart in their communication with the public, and how they use also the far right groups in different countries and in Georgia as well. So this is something that we know better than others. But at the same time, we also understand what might be the solution for Georgia. And the solution is the non-stop fight against Russian influence and fight for democratic institutions here. Because if we have democratic institutions, then we can manage to build the country and with it, of course, make our country stronger.
Organizations like Transparency International that ensure government institutions remain democratic are exactly the types of groups the foreign agent law targets. But LGBTQ plus groups and foreign-funded organizations like Mandala that intersect with this community are targets for blackmail. Say someone who isn't openly gay or uses drugs is a critic of the government and uses Mandala services. The fear is that this foreign agents law can be used to go after them by forcing the organization to give up the person's personal data.
Even though we have made some progress with the LGBTQI community rights during the last maybe 10 years or so, it is still incredibly difficult to exist as a queer person in Georgia unless you are surrounded by people who are okay with your identity, like a workplace and a family. And it's very rare. It's very, very, very rare to have a family that supports you with who you are in that regard. So if someone gets outed by the government, it could very well mean the end of their life, at least indirectly, or if they're unlucky, quite literally as well, because it's not uncommon for queer people to get killed.
I spoke with Timo, the founder of Mandala, about why he felt a harm reduction organization was needed in Georgia and how they plan on moving forward in this uncertain political environment.
It's interesting because even before the foreign agent law was adopted, we as drug users, as a community, were already heavily criminalized, so this attitude is not new to us. So after the law was adopted, we're just going to get another label of an agent, even though we already have very unpleasant labels before. And about how I feel about this election, obviously I feel horrible because I know that while this government is still in power, our organization will never be able to continue working like we want it to work, and it may not be able to work at all.
How does this impact you personally? Are you somebody who currently recreationally uses, or are you in recovery? I'm interested in your personal story.
So I am a recreational user, and I was an injection user for 15 years. And during that time, I had some problems with the law. I was in jail for a couple of times, and I also went through a couple of rounds of failed rehab attempts. But around 2 or 3 years ago, I was finally able to overcome my addiction, and now I only use recreational drugs and psychedelic drugs for my personal development, and not only just for having fun. So the reason why a lot of people have an attitude towards any type of drug use the same way is most likely the result of the war on drugs and their message box of all drugs are bad, regardless of what you do and how you do it. And in addition to that, the state that a person with a heavy addiction is in is very visible and very vivid for a lot of non-users. And that makes it easier for them to generalize all type of drug use and believe that everything has the same consequence. And that basically feeds into this demonization of this topic as well.
Yeah, you know, I'm also personally interested in this because my uncle with whom I lived, he was addicted to crack. And he had a really terrible addiction, and he eventually died of heroin. And so when I was growing up, that's the extreme that I understood. And I wish that he had an alternative where he knew that there was an option to use recreationally and that his use was not criminalized, and that he had places like this back in my hometown of Detroit where he could learn how to enjoy whatever drug that he used, but in a safe way.
We also fight for the same cause of trying to remove this demonization layer from any drug use, including the ones that we ourselves also believe should not be used by anyone. But by being critical of those substances, you're also being critical towards the users of those substances, and that's making their life much harder. So as harm reduction specialists, we don't think that we have the right or the luxury to be critical of any substance.
My last question to you is, what are your next steps? Because you provide all these services to so many people, and you have the funding that's going to be at risk. The fines are coming because you have not signed up as a foreign agent. What's your concern for the people that your organization serves? Because you're a founder, and this government is coming in and shutting down something that means so much to you.
We don't have a specific plan already just yet because we're trying to understand how these events are going to evolve during the couple of weeks. But there are a couple of alternatives that our organization could use. If nothing changes about this law, we, as we exist right now, will have to cease our organization. We'll have to close because the fines are too high for us to be able to afford them. However, there are some alternatives. For example, we could register our organizations abroad and then continue our work here so that the law doesn't apply to us. Or we could change the status of the organization to an LTD or something commercial for a bit so that the law will not be able to apply to us at its current form. But there are a lot of members of the social society, especially lawyers who work on this subject, who are working to find out the best way for our organization, our type of organization, to continue existing without being fined or without being registered as an agent. But the one thing that we are sure of is that the work that we're doing is not going to go away. The experience that we have and the community that we have will always be able to get help from us.
The mood at Mandala was pretty sober after the elections, but after Georgia Dream announced that they'd postpone pursuing European Union membership, mass protests have taken over the streets of Tbilisi and other parts of the country, and they're only growing bigger by the day. Will they culminate into a revolution that forces a change in government? Who knows? But the energy of these protests show no sign of dying down, which gives hope to organizations like Mandala that the Georgian people want change. Hopefully, the kind that will help Mandala keep their doors open, free of government overreach, so that they can continue their work of keeping Georgians safe while they're enjoying the freedoms of their ever-evolving society.